This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. I don't talk about it all the time on this show, but I personally love the word liberty. Liberty to me is politics, is economics. Without liberty, nothing else matters. My guest today, I have a sneaky suspicion, shares my feelings. Jeffrey Tucker is an American economics writer of the Austrian School. He's an advocate of anarcho-capitalism and Bitcoin, a publisher of many libertarian books. And many years ago, he helped to promote my first film, which came at economics from a libertarian perspective. Look, it only takes you a few searches, a few Google searches, and you will find out that Jeff is prolific as you know what. Jeff's the type of guest that I really do think if I could have on almost every week, maybe Jeff would get bored and I would get bored, but he's the type of guy that you can tell I can just go down the rabbit hole with. A curious guy who's well-read, well-written, and works at it like crazy. We can all be so fortunate to pick up a few gems, a few morsels of intellectual grist to help us push forward. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, primarily about liberty, with Jeffrey Tucker. So Jeff, this piece of writing of yours, I just love. This is dated December 13th, 2012. I'm reading the conclusion. Just give me a minute here. Every act of entrepreneurship is revolutionary and rooted in the anarchist spirit. It strikes at the heart of the status quo. It dares to be dissatisfied with what is. It imagines something new and better. It brings about the unexpected, unapproved, and progressive change by adding a new dimension of experience to how we understand ourselves and how we interact with others. Without entrepreneurship, history would lack forward motion. Our understanding of the uniqueness of our time in this world would forever be undefined, and society itself would atrophy and finally die. With it, every attempt to control and freeze the world faces opposition and long-run failure. History teaches that those who dare to stand in the way of human progress will eventually be run over. Yes, there is plenty of friction and too many victims as we get from here to there, but we will get there, one creative act of disobedience at a time. End quote. I love that piece of writing. You're probably going to tell me, Mike, you could find that all over my world, but I love that piece.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fun to listen to.
I've not read that before. No practice, and so
yeah, that works. It works. Yeah, that
so
works.
Listen, let's speak to that for a second, because if I think back over the last, oh my gosh, to the 1990s, a George Bush administration, a Clinton administration, another Bush administration, an Obama administration, now a Trump administration. But what I just read, that opening from you, that's timeless. It doesn't make a difference, the administration, does it?
No, the regimes come and go. But there's something about technology, the methods we use, and the way we learn, the information we share with each other, that cuts through and dominates and becomes the theme of history, which goes against everything we're taught, right? I think we're mostly taught that history is shaped by the leaders of society, and I'm just increasingly convinced that that is really not true. History is shaped by the tools we use, the spirit we have, the faith that we exercise, and the conduct of our daily interactions with each other. This is really what shapes history, not these fools that claim to rule us. In a funny way, I think that everybody is too either afraid of or celebratory of political leaders. I just don't think they matter that much.
It's a great point. And I think for Americans that don't know, I wish, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I know you spent a lot of time around that area too. I think for people to truly understand that the folks in Washington, D.C., they're not there to necessarily do anything except get elected. I mean, their whole process is about getting elected because they derive this feeling of power from kind of lording over folks. And it's kind of the exact opposite of what people think those people do when they go there.
Yeah, well, and then you get elected, and then you have to get reelected. It's their job, and that's what they're good at. People get good at what they do, whatever it is. Politicians run for office. That's what they're good at, and that's their specialty. It's their main thing that they do well, and they serve the constituents well. Especially state legislators and House of Representatives members and members of Congress and Senate. They serve their constituents and their voters, and that's it. That's what they specialize in. But they are not visionaries. They cannot run the world. They're not defining history. I think increasingly we know this. Actually, I was thinking about this the other day. I'd love to read history and sort of throw myself into the mindset of the 1960s, where everybody was enthusiastic about sort of public housing or school reform, or back in the 1930s when people thought that you just had to build a bunch of dams and bridges and roads and things that would cause the economy to recover, or 15 years earlier, people believed that all you had to do to get rid of liquor consumption and production in this country was pass. It's really difficult to recreate those times in your mind. I don't think we have anywhere near the faith in government that previous generations had. At all. I mean, I live in Atlanta. The government doesn't really try anymore, and that's a good thing. I think it's good. Governments are out of money. That's my evaluation of our present moment.
Since we've kind of talked, or I've opened up with this kind of entrepreneurial anarchist spirit, this great intro from you, I know something near and dear to you, and this really gets at a lot of different issues, which is Bitcoin, the cryptocurrencies, blockchain. Why don't you give from your perspective? I mean, this is something relatively new, but you've been writing about it for years. Why don't you give for the uninitiated? Because look, Bitcoin becomes a lot more interesting when it's, gone from 200 to 4,000 in a few years. But why don't you give for the audience out there, from your perspective, why Bitcoin is so important to you?
Bitcoin was important to me because I've been studying monetary theory since I was, undergraduate. I wrote my undergraduate thesis, on the gold standard. I felt like I knew everything about monetary theory, its history. I mean, I've written books on the topic. I thought I read everything. I thought I had it all figured out. And so when Bitcoin came along, and somebody I guess I first heard about it in 2009, I just dismissed it because I knew better. I thought money could not be made this way, that there was something about the digital world that would make it impossible. I mean, it's implausible. Some dude writes an algorithm and you can plug your computer in and make money, and people are going to, none of it made any sense to me. And so, so a few years later, I finally just had to confront, the evidence of my senses. Bitcoin was clearly working, and I realized I had to kind of bury my own a priori theorizing. I had to get humble in the face of the market. I had to look out the window instead of just sitting staring at books. I had to actually pay attention to what was going on. And studying Bitcoin helped me not only just advance my knowledge in a series of areas like cryptography and the potential for digital networks and ledgers and that sort of thing, but mostly what it did is it humbled me as an intellectual to realize that the market and entrepreneurship can know more than any intellectual can know. And after I discovered this, Yeah, I've approached the world of ideas slightly differently. I like to think that I'm a little more deferential to the results of the market, a little more willing to watch the unfolding of history rather than pretend to prescribe exactly what should happen, to defer to what is rather than sit around wishing what were. And it just taught me a very valuable lesson. It opened up the work of F.A. Hayek to me in a way that I had never understood it before. I'd been reading Hayek for 20 years, but Bitcoin kind of gave me a new way to understand Hayek.
Bring the audience into your perspective there so they can, I know we could go off for a very long tangent here, but bring them into your understanding and let them follow along.
I knew that Hayek had written a lot about the knowledge that's essential, the things that we have to know as a society in order to make our society work. There has to be a ton of things about basically everything. Technological processes, consumer demand, availability of resources relative to demands of time. You have to know mores and manners and contractual conventions. There's so much knowledge. There's actually an infinite amount of knowledge that you have to have in order to sort of cause the social order to function. Now, I had read Hayek say this in the past. I didn't really understand what it meant, right? But after Bitcoin, I began to realize that one of the ways that Bitcoin works is that it's decentralized, and that's its most sort of prescient feature, is that it's a decentralized ledger application that can be owned by an infinite number of nodes. So you've got the knowledge that's necessary to make Bitcoin work is sort of embedded in millions of different places, and Bitcoin itself is it's a cumulative technology that puts together basically 5 different disciplines and shoves them all into a single sort of unit. And when you look at the extent of the complexity and just how many decades, really centuries or millennia it took to lead up to this point, you begin to kind of get a sense of what Hayek's saying, that the only real way that society can organize itself is local knowledge of time and place embedded in every single individual human mind and its capacity for working with others. It's the only way society can work, is through freedom, in other words, right? You can't have a central plan that is able to do anything remotely like this. And that's sort of the beauty of Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin came about not because the Federal Reserve created it or the Department of Treasury or any academic at MIT or anywhere else. It didn't appear in a scholarly journal. It was a decentralized application that was released on an email listserv, by an anonymous programmer or 2 or 3. That is just amazing if you think about it. And now it's changing the world.
Okay, so I'd be amiss if I didn't pick your speculations, so to speak. So as you look at Bitcoin unfold, you've got these many decades of studying monetary theory. Give me a projection. Give me a way that you could see Bitcoin unfolding in a way where state power decreases.
One thing that's glorious about Bitcoin is it's an international currency, which is harder as Americans for us to wrap our brains around. I mean, Bitcoin spins the same anywhere in the world, which I didn't get. I remember a few years ago I was in New Zealand and I wanted to take a helicopter ride and they accepted Bitcoin. And I thought, oh, good heavens, I've got to figure out the exchange rate. So I converted Bitcoin so I said, what's the New Zealand dollar exchange rate with Bitcoin? They told me. And so I said, okay, great. And so then I went to the exchange rate and converted New Zealand dollars to American dollars. And then American dollars back into Bitcoin. And then I realized, oh, wait, it's exactly the same price. Do you understand? So I didn't really... It was like at that moment I realized, oh, this is a global currency. So that by itself makes it more useful than any national money. And the odd thing about Bitcoin is it's kind of what they say, the word that people use is deflationary. I think it's a little bit of a misnomer. In other words, it rises in value all the time. So there's an incentive. It increases in value relative I mean, not all the time, but, just generally over time, it does. And so there's an incentive to save it because you actually make money by not spending. So, can you imagine the effect that will have on sort of frugality and capital accumulation? It's got the potential to make us immensely wealthy, not just as individuals, but as a society. And the important thing is that central banks cannot control it under any circumstances. Now, some listeners out there going, oh, sure, until they decide to abolish it. But, the important thing to remember is that the ecosphere of the crypto asset world is essentially invulnerable to any manner of control. The only thing that governments can really control is the coming and going, into and out of that ecosphere, that infrastructure of the crypto asset world, the blockchain ledgers. They can control your capacity to get in or get out, but once you're in it, you're free. I think what this does is incentivizes everybody to get in and stay in, and that's increasingly why we're seeing the exchange rate go the way it is. And it's just so we understand. There's something I would really like to say about this to explain, because I really haven't gone into it yet.
The floor is yours.
Okay. We really need to understand that Bitcoin is in a funny way, it's an application. But if you only think about Bitcoin, you really are missing the important thing. What's critical here is the underlying technology, which is called in the Bitcoin world the blockchain, or which is actually more properly called a distributed ledger. Now, immediately your listeners are going, oh, well, this is really boring. Wait a minute. We have to go back in history and understand that there are two really critical stages to making prosperity happen. One is the invention of private property. Like, people have to figure out that private property is better than just beating each other up and grabbing things from each other. I'll recognize your rights, you recognize my rights. That's a really important first step to getting life civilized. The second really important step is often neglected, which is you have to have a technology to document these ownership claims so that they can be traded over time and people can develop peaceful expectations of what the claims of others are. So no matter where you look in all of history, you'll find some technology for documenting ownership rights. Initially it was stones, and then it was clay, and then later vellum, and then later parchment. Not vellum, vellum came after parchment. Papyrus, and then parchment. But by the time you get to the Medicis, you've got this beautiful, beautiful sort of shaved sheepskin called vellum, that the Medicis were able to record their accounts on. And that's what gave rise to capitalism in Europe. We were talking about the 15th, 16th century. Without that technology of recording ownership claims and debts and payments and just to document stuff, capitalism never would have taken off. Actually, feudalism would have never come to an end. So that's a very interesting way to think about it. Okay, let's just bump up now to the 1970s. We developed some really sophisticated technologies and databasing, within the course of our lifetimes, and that was just fantastic. The problem with all database technology is it's kind of lagged behind the sophistication of our financial instruments. And that's essentially what happened in 2008. We had some really sophisticated financial instruments that are out there being traded, all sorts of derivatives of MBS products and everything else. We didn't have the technology to keep up with ownership claims. So when the whole thing went belly up, there was a massive scramble to find out that basic thing. Who owns what? And we still never really figured that out. Actually, the Fed had to buy a bunch of this junk, right? Because they couldn't figure out competing claims. So the blockchain comes out in 2009 as a technology to finally solve this problem that has vexed humanity since the ancient world. The problem with all previous technologies of documenting ownership claims is that they were always centralized. There's always some dude in charge, some one family in charge, a company in charge, a government in charge, a bureaucracy in charge. Suddenly in 2009, we found a way to put this ledger of ownership claims into a distributed cloud that all of humanity can simultaneously watch and keep an eye on. And that's what the blockchain does. So there's no longer a central point of failure for the technology that is so essential to making our lives good. So you understand then that Bitcoin is only one sort of application of this ledger technology. It's not, the most important thing. Is that there's so many other applications. And so if you think about it, like, history will never be the same because we know what the blockchain looks like. We know what it can do. From now on, it's just a matter of figuring out ever better ways to go about using it.
I like an attitude that I've seen you express about Bitcoin, and essentially, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but you've kind of said, look, this, and you obviously know exactly the details as you just outlined, but you've kind of said, look, the young people have really taken this and they're running with it. And let's don't discount where they're running with it and how hard they're running. However, there are some very wise people, names that you probably know. Mark Spitznagel, for one, a fund manager. He has come out and pretty much said, hey, this just doesn't really have a chance to work. And again, I'm paraphrasing on him. And he essentially says that because government will step in at some point in time. Another fund manager, a guy named Howard Marks, who writes great. Howard has come out and basically said, it's just these young millennials after the Great Recession and they don't know what they're doing and this is all just going to implode. And there might be massive ups and downs. That happens, like the railways or something like that. But as you've just outlined, there is something significant here beyond the probably future booms and busts that will come within this technology.
Oh, sure. And I get, it's actually amusing. One of the funny things about being involved with the sector is that you see the same waves of opinion over and over again. I remember when Bitcoin went from, 11 to $30 pretty quickly and then crashed down to $14. Everybody said, look, see, that's just proof this thing was a bubble. And, if you got in at 30, you lost your shirt, people were furious, and then the same thing happened, when it went from 80 back down to, 25, and then when it went up to 180 and fell to 90 and so on. And so there's just successive waves of hysteria. And every time people say, well, Bitcoin is dead, And yeah, it's going to be subject to this kind of stuff. And the enthusiasm that young people show for it is really funny and really amusing, and a lot of people make bad decisions. I had a good friend of mine, you can tell this just a few years ago, who bought in because when people want to buy, it's because they, there's some reason, or it's on the news, it's it's the talk of the town. They kind of get swept up in the ethos and they have some sense that like they're being left behind. So they rush into the market, of course, inevitably buying at the high, right? So I had a friend who bought in at 1,020, and he was mad at me because I think after that it collapsed down to 650 or something, and he said, "I can't believe I'm poor, and because of you, I bought in at this very high point." And I said, "Listen, buddy, I never told you to buy, I don't tell people when to buy and when to sell. I mean, if I had that kind of knowledge, I would just keep it to myself and be a billionaire already, So I'm very careful about that. But the funny thing is that he was really upset with me for a long time, as long as it stayed at that level. And I haven't talked to him since because it turns out, of course, that buying in at 1,020 was a fantastic decision, actually. So, his investment is quadrupled in the meantime. So that's some pretty good returns. But he didn't know that at the time. So it's really interesting to kind of watch these waves of hysteria. And the thing about being a really good Bitcoiner or crypto enthusiast in general is that you just can't get emotional about it. You just got to watch it. And nowadays, It's pretty interesting. People have these accounts at these exchanges, Poloniex and BitREx and Kraken and these places. They rebalance their portfolios in a very interesting way. You know, they'll buy the newest crypto thing. They'll read the white paper and buy it. And most of the kids that are involved in the stuff they understand that most of these things are going to lose, but some of them are going to win. You know, so you buy Dash, you buy Neo, you get Ethereum Classic. There's a fork in the Ethereum platform, so you get your regular Ethereum or Ethereum Classic, and then we saw a fork the other day in Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. That was a funny one because all existing owners of Bitcoin, because of the fork, actually became owners of Bitcoin Cash if you had the sophistication to get it. Well, a lot of people went to the trouble of getting it, and Bitcoin Cash kind of languished, at like $200 for a while, and people figured, well, that's not going anywhere. And then just over the course of 3 days, shot up to $700 or $800, and so suddenly all Bitcoin Cash owners were rich. Anybody who sold the thing, was kicking themselves. So there's an adventure to the whole thing, and it's fun, and I get it. Young people are way more interested in this than they are going to their Merrill Lynch broker and saying, "Oh, let me buy, a balanced portfolio of Fortune 500 companies," which is really dull, and you can't make a lot of money. You can't beat the trading models of these big firms. But in the crypto markets, you still have a chance for real profits, real excitement, real honest to goodness market-based drama. Do you see what I mean? It's just fun, and people are aware of what they're getting into. I was over at the UPS store the other day mailing a package, and I was using my Bitcoin credit card, and the guy said, "Oh wow, Bitcoin, huh?" And he told me, he said, "I bought Neo, when it was $1, and now it's $100." And I said, "Wait, you're a Neo investor?" And he said, "Oh sure, I've got a whole portfolio of crypto assets." And so we just began to kind of jabber on about this stuff, and this is just some dude, you know what I mean? So
we're already, I haven't used the term yet, but we're already in the field of, quote, liberty. I don't think there could be a word that's more dear to you than the word liberty. As we speak about cryptocurrencies, what I find interesting is so many young people today reaching for this great technology, speculating like crazy, assembling these portfolios of digital currencies. There's got to be booms and busts. That's the way it goes. But on the flip side, I see, and you're a man in your early 50s, I'm in my late 40s. I believe we both went to the same university, George Mason, and which has got a really interesting perspective for people that don't know. George Mason takes a very liberty perspective on things, but what I'm getting a little bit confused about with younger people today, and I'm generalizing a little bit, but I'm seeing this desire on one hand to go this direction that you and I both just go, wow, I love it, run hard. But then on the other side, there is a certain number of a certain population of younger people that are reaching for state power to go beyond what you and I would have otherwise thought was a limit on something like speech, where there's it's this weird conundrum that I don't get. Why don't you speak to where we are today on that side of the coin?
Yeah, well, you've got, Bernie made sort of leftism fashionable again, partially, Bernie Sanders, partially because he was promising to forgive all the student debts. I think student debt has served as a real source of intellectual corruption for an entire generation. And I honestly, I get it, right? I mean, these people are told for their whole lives, the goal in life is to get to college and then you'll be well taken care of. And they spend $250,000. They ended up with, maybe, $80,000 to $100,000 in debt, and they get their college degree and they get out there in the job marketplace. And the only thing the prospective employers want to know is what experience do you have and what knowledge and what skills do you have? And they're like, well, wait, that's not the purpose of college. I have this degree. I mean, what's the problem? And they're like, well, we're kind of looking for experience and skills. Well, nobody told them that. So they feel ripped off and robbed, and now they're saddled with immense debt while they're working as baristas at Starbucks. Okay, so they're mad at the world, they're mad at the culture, and they want their debts paid by others. I totally get it.
Sometimes modern technology just disappoints me. Jeff and I got dropped there, and it's not because we happen to be 9,000 miles away from each other for this conversation. Just one of those fluke things. Let me get back to Jeff Tucker.
I grew up in Lubbock, Texas, so that if I was driving to Houston, my mother would say, "Hey, listen, when you're in Houston, can you call your aunt, Sally, and let her know that that I love her and that you're in town. You don't have to see her, just give her a call." And the reason is we had to pay so-called long distance.
What's long distance now?
We don't even know what that means.
Hey, that gets to your point, though. One of the interesting things in the article that I first quoted in the beginning of this call was talking about an innovation where Google basically said, hey, here's YouTube. Then all of a sudden, everyone put pirated material up. Then Google was served with cease and desist. And then they came up with a solution that got around. Why don't you talk about that solution? That was actually the point of that article.
Well, this is one of the most extraordinary things that's happened actually in the 21st century is the sort of the ever more refinement that's taken place in IP rights to basically get rid of the old walls that were erected between creative media. Recognize the fact that the internet is a giant copy machine. That's what it does best. That's what it specializes in. Yeah, there's been a lot of really interesting entrepreneurial innovations to find out ways in which we can share, but commoditize the interest of users in a way that turns into profitability. So in other words, instead of using force and takedown notices and bludgeons and clubs to beat each other up, you stole my stuff, you stole my stuff. Let's incentivize each other to share material, and then we can be better off with both of us doing that. And then push out advertising. I mean, basically what we're getting to is a really wonderful situation in which just the very fact of our human interest, our eyeballs, the time that we spend looking at something is being commoditized and monetized for us online. And that is just absolutely glorious.
One of the things that was really cool in that article, and I'll probably put the link to this article in the write-up, but the idea that, look, if you create something, whether it's writing or music or whatnot, look, if there's no eyeballs, it becomes useless because no one's listening, no one's reading, whatever. But if you have fans that want to promote it, and now through the use of technology, Google's a great example, and YouTube, it lets everyone share in something that otherwise would have been obscure and not generating any revenue.
You have to get attention in today's economy. It's always been true, right? It just doesn't matter how many widgets you make at home. If you can't market them and get people caring about them and get them out there, you're never going to make a dime. And it's that way in the information economy too. I mean, your main goal is to get out there and earn people's attention. And it's a really rivalrous world out there. I mean, Fee.org fights for attention every single day. And how do we fight for that attention? We strive to publish ever better material, to serve people ever better, to do things that are ever more compelling. And what's nice about that is that there is no one formula. There's no one way forward because tastes are always changing. The competition's always changing. Rivalry is very intense. We think of every article we publish as basically opening a business, and we try to package it in a way that serves the customer. It's the only way you can earn attention these days, essentially by serving each other ever better. That's the kind of world we live in, and I love it. I think it's really exciting. Other people look at that and go, "That's terrible. That's too much work. That's too much trouble." I just don't think it is. I think it's where we want to be as a society. We want to live in a world where we're incentivized as much as possible to be productive, peaceful, and valuable to each other. Ever more recognizing people's rights and what they can contribute to us and what we can contribute them in a kind of a big enterprise to get mutually wealthy, so we can have better lives.
That dovetails right back to when we lost our call to that technology breakdown. You were kind of going down the path of explaining how so many young people have bought into the idea of, hey, get the college degree, and then they get out, and then all of a sudden, hold on, it's not worth as much.
Well, it's so sad.
Right,
so
right.
sad.
And before we broke off, I was thinking, and while we were delayed, I was thinking, it's not just the young people, because if you're 16, 17 years of age, and I'm looking at a sister with 3 teenagers coming along now, all going to be facing school choices. But if the parents don't think this through as well, I mean, look, 30 years ago, you weren't spending this much money for school. So now the parents, seem to me, are driving so much of this because they want their kids to have this degree. And the parents don't get the very things that you're talking about on this podcast right now today as the most important.
No, here's the problem. Parents are extremely risk averse. Parents, they have kids, they're looking at the kid, their initial thought is this is the most awesome, glorious creature in the history of humankind, right? That lasts until they're about 3. And then you're kind of like, wow, this kid kind of is misbehaving and sort of not exactly what I expected, right? So you follow your kid from the ages of 3 until 20 wondering, yeah, can this kid really make it? I want the best for him or her, but I'm just not really sure. And for a lot of parents, they push this education thing and this degree thing as a way of kind of guaranteeing their success. The problem is that a degree is ever less valuable out in the real marketplace. I mean, here in Atlanta, I know a lot of kids that are just killing it out there in the software industry and software sales and all kinds of professions related to digital entrepreneurship and that sort of thing. A lot of them didn't go to college or dropped out of college. Some of the most successful young people I know in Atlanta actually dropped out of high school in order to pursue these kind of professions, and they're doing really, really well. Meanwhile, you've got a lot of universities around here that are just filled up with kids that are spending $250,000, 4 years of their lives studying stuff they're never going to use, during which time they're not actually working. Because, when I was in school, you could work and pay your way through school. Now, that is futile. So you don't even have the incentive to work while you're in college. And forget working before college. I mean, under the American laws, which are increasingly intensely enforced, you can't even really get a real job until you're like 17, by which time you don't even care about it anymore. Kids aren't getting commercial experience. By the way, I'm really passionate about this topic of youth unemployment and employment, and I blame the government for the large part of it. You've got compulsory schooling. You've also got these child labor laws, which date from the New Deal, which do not need to be there. We've got to come up with better ways to mix it up a little bit, a little school, a little work. And as far as I'm concerned, you could do this from the age of 11 or 12, and I think it would just benefit people immensely. I think right now these child labor laws are actually violating human rights. It's just wrong that a 14-year-old kid,
it opens up the minimum wage as well.
Oh, and the minimum wage too. I'm headed in early November. I've been invited to Yale University to make an argument for the political union concerning this topic of child labor. I don't know anybody else who's writing about it besides me, but I think it's so enormously important. It just doesn't make sense what we do. Between the minimum wage and the child labor laws and compulsory schooling laws, we're ruining the lives of these young people, and then they're graduating from college with immense amounts of debt, are very frustrated in their professions, live in an environment of 1 or 2% economic growth, where they're still dependent upon their parents. They're starting to get angry. They're looking for scapegoats, and no surprise, it ends up spilling out into the streets with these idiotic political dramas we're seeing in places like Charlottesville and Boston.
Let me stay there for a second with you. As a guy who loves the word liberty, it's got to be difficult to look at modern day society with so many people instead of you and I are having this conversation about ideas, concepts, things we can imagine, the creative process. To me, in every relationship I have, I want it to start there. But certain very large segments of the population are now saying, no, before we start talking, recognize the color of my skin, recognize my gender, my sex, recognize my religion. I've literally seen in the last few weeks people that have told me flat out, hey, check yourself. We've got to start with these identity issues before we can get to reason. My brain can't compute the identity stuff. I can only stay in reason. I can't go to the identity thing.
Well, and I tell you, there's nothing that makes people angrier than if you look at them and say, I would recognize what your opinion is. I would recognize your rights and the legitimacy of what you say and your value of a human being, except for the fact that you're white, you're black, you're a woman, you're a man,
you're straight, you're gay, whatever.
You're straight, you're gay, you're a Christian, you're a Muslim. You start attacking things about people that are at the core of who they are and disregarding their humanity. And I'm telling you, it happens from the left and it happens from the right.
What do people really want with this identity stuff? What is the real, isn't the real desire? They just want respect and they don't know how to get it?
I tend to think it's more ideological than that. I mean, I think that's part of it, but it's also this conception of the world that there's a fixed pie and I'm going to get mine. If I'm not getting what I feel like I need, it's probably your fault. Let's face it, academia has been promoting this message now for a very, very long time. I mean, colleges get class after class after class. It's identity politics. It's, there's no economic understanding, in literature class and politics and sociology and even psychology classes. I mean, the stuff they're preaching, the class conflict, the race conflict, the religious conflict. There's all these conflict ideologies. It's kind of, even though we don't live this way in real life, academia is just packed with people who think only in terms of this. And this is the nonsense that's being drilled into kids' heads. And I'm not sure that they really have an alternative model to really think about the world. I mean, we just got a huge educational job ahead of us. An educational job, and also I think we have a political job to do, not in the sense of like, oh, let's elect a right-wing guy to crush the left-wing guy or vice versa, but rather let's just diminish the role of government entirely in people's lives, get rid of the crushing taxation that's causing the business to be restrained in its willingness to expand and hire, and kick up economic growth to 3, 4, 5%. And I think you change the topic entirely.
As you say that, there could be people listening that maybe they might assume, oh my gosh, that sounds like a very right-leaning thing, reduce the taxes. But then my counter argument would be, well, hold on. We all know that Apple, which is a company, I use their products every day. I love their products, but Apple has a very distinct political ideology. But what's so interesting about Apple is they park literally hundreds of billions of dollars in Ireland to avoid taxes. So it's just this, there's the headlines and then there's the reality of what people do.
It's absolutely crazy. I mean, if you have amazing, successful company like Apple, there should be every reason to expand and expand and expand in the most economically efficient way, and not taking these circuitous routes to hide your surpluses and funny little tax schemes all over the world. None of it makes any sense.
But it does make sense given the current tax laws.
Oh, it definitely does. When I think about the Trump administration, I think it's just it's just been one huge calamity. And I really 2 years ago was writing against the sort of the ethos that he represents. What was fascinating to me is as you approached the general election, Trump started getting better at his messaging. Instead of anti-immigration and mercantilism and, let's spend a lot of money on infrastructure and everything, he started talking about real stuff like we've got a problem in the healthcare sector, we got to get rid of Obamacare. But he started talking about tax cuts, and it was great. And that really kind of put him over the top. But you look at the way things have unfolded in real time in the last 6 months. He tried to tweet his way towards healthcare reform, but basically otherwise did nothing, and attacked the House when they came up with one decent proposal for half a day. So he dropped the ball on that. It's just been a disaster. His tax cut proposal, which is mostly pushed by the Treasury Department because he's got some good people over there, was wonderful. I mean, cutting the cap gains tax and the corporate rate of tax.
Why has cap gains not been cut already? I don't get it.
We have one of the highest rates in the world, and it'd just be the most important thing if you could just slash corporate income taxes by a third and capital gains taxes by a third, and get us on par with Canada and other countries around the world. You would inspire just such surprising and interesting and unpredictable levels of investment, growth, and business expansion in this country. I mean, you know, wherever you sit, if you live in the United States, just think of a business within the square mile from where you live, and imagine what they could do if they could pay a third less in corporate income taxes, or if capital gains taxes were far lower and profitable investments were not punished. I mean, what would that do to economic growth? I think it would just be. It would be spectacular. Actually.
The counter argument would be, though, that the people that have that extra benefit will just hold on to it themselves and go on vacations and just be more personally rich.
Oh, it's just you know, the chance to make more money, you know, is something that's the most awesome thing. That's what all business people, entrepreneurs are looking for. But they're not going to be doing that as long as they feel it's going to be punished, or that the risk is too high. If they're barely making it as it is, they get really risk averse and they hunker down. And they're happy with the profits they have. Something has got to happen. I think that's actually more important from a macroeconomic point of view than cutting individual income taxes, which I think that would be nice. Payroll tax cuts would be glorious, but that's like stage 2. We've got to at least get to the first step. And you notice that's completely off the table now.
I have no confidence in any of this, Jeff. It's not going to happen.
I know. It's just so tragic to me. I find it just this gigantic missed opportunity, and I'm pulling my hair out. Apparently, there are other people in the White House that are too, so we're hardly alone in this. But it is tremendously sad to see the squandering of political capital on these idiotic causes. I mean, I think tonight we're going to get a speech from our president about how we're going to send another 4,000 troops to Afghanistan. 16-year-long war that is absolutely unwinnable. I grew up in the midst of the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, and as a kid, I remember you thinking, well, that is one stupid government if they think they're going to be able to do anything in Afghanistan.
Those folks know how to survive. They know how to fight. It's never going to be won.
No, it'll never be won. I spent a lot of time talking to people who've done several tours over there, high-level consultants, security officials, and regular troops. And what the U.S. has done to that country is just such an unbelievable mess. And there is no clean answer. But everybody I've talked to says that, as messy and terrible as that could be, a pullout is really the only answer. And the Soviets understood that at some point, and the U.S. is going to come to terms with it too. But I don't know, governments are not good at admitting, okay, this war was silly. It's not working. We in fact don't know how to make Afghanistan a better place, and we suck at that, and we're just going to move on. Governments are terrible at admitting that sort of thing.
In our little bit of time we have left, I want to take you to an issue that we were kind of going down the path of. That is the free flow of speech and information. Look, we all know about the Great Firewall in China. I thoroughly enjoy going to mainland China, but I don't thoroughly enjoy not being able to access anything when I go there. They've done a fantastic job for their country of bringing hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. To probably every economist in the 70s would have said, no way this is going to work. Well, it's worked in a crazy way so far. But, I really don't like the stoppage of information flow that I see in China. I don't like the directions that I see in America where people want to stop speech. I mean, the whole idea of hate speech is, well, if you can't have hate speech, then you don't have free speech. And if I mention China, I mention US, but there are many other countries around the world, countries that people would not otherwise expect. I'm not going to name names right now, that I know these countries are blocking websites, blocking this, blocking that. They don't advertise it. They don't tell people they're doing it, but it's painfully obvious. And these are westernized type countries. I still remember when Netscape went public in the summer of 1995. I really hope all that optimism that started right then, August of 1995, I really hope we're not going to end up building a bunch of walls, digital walls, all around us in the next 10 years, and then we're going to wake up and it's all going to be gone.
Well, listen, we're going to try. I mean, that's one of the great tragedies. We're going to try to do that. It's not going to last. Over time, the walls are going to come down. 50 years from now, these debates we're having today will seem just ridiculous. And my concern is that, one or two generations hence, people are going to look back and go, what were those people thinking in the early part of the 21st century?
They weren't thinking.
That thought they could control information. Don't they know? Didn't they know that information just wants to be free? I mean, they're holding back progress of humanity with all the censorship and the imposition of IP laws and the prosecution of people for trying to create things and the harassment of business. There's a great blockchain innovation and all the Treasury Department did try to do which was trying to make it operate like the old technology that is trying to replace. We're just doing so many dumb things right now, and it is embarrassing from a historical sweep of civilization point of view. Again, government cannot win this struggle. They will certainly lose. But in the meantime, they can slow us down in ways that we're missing so much potential, and it's just enormously tragic. That's the great thing about you look at a history of innovation. A good idea comes along, it's going to eventually prevail. And everything and everybody who tries to stand in the way is going to get mowed down, eventually. But it comes at a terrible, terrible cost. Blockchain right now is, I think, the single most exciting thing that's happened in my lifetime from a technological point of view, maybe in the last century, maybe ever. I'm so enormously excited about it. I mean, just the possibility of anybody to be able to float an idea out there, float an idea for some great new human service they want, tokenize it, raise capital just simply online from regular people.
Have you seen where the blockchain being proposed? I'm sure you have. You're more well read at this than me, but blockchain being used for property rights in places like Brazil with the favelas, where people don't really know ownership, and this ability to go in, post and solve some of the real estate squabbles. There's just so many different benefits.
I'm an advisor to a company called Factum that issues a token called the Factoid. They are registering property all over the Dominican Republic and other Latin American countries right now. And the reason for this is that these property owners need some documentation that they can present, when thugs come along. Yeah, to get loans, and when thugs come along and try to mix things up with them and say, hey, I think you shouldn't have this. And it's like, no, here it is. And so this company is doing very well, hard at work using blockchain technology to register property. There's smart contracting going on all the time. This Ethereum platform that was invented just a few years ago has tens of thousands of applications floating on it that are smart contracts that, automatically fire up and you lay out your conditions and terms. If they're fulfilled, they're paid. If they're not, they're not. I mean, it's just, like we began this interview with some discussion of what it means to document your ownership claims. It means everything. It means a more peaceful world, essentially.
What does it mean for the nation state, though, Jeff?
Well, the nation state relies on two things. One is particular contained geographic jurisdiction, and the second thing is that it's very good at controlling the physical world. So blockchain technology removes both those conditions. It's a digital technology that flows, doesn't care anything about borders. It's weightless and takes no space. So from the point of view of the nation state, I think ultimately it means the death of what we call a nation state today, or at least its decline to purely really symbolic importance. I think that's where we're headed. When? I don't know. History is moving very, very quickly. When I look back at technologies like internal combustion or steel or railroads or flight or electricity, the amount of time it took to get from invention to middle-class consumer application was very, very long in every one of those cases. But blockchain technology is moving very, very quickly. Like I say, when I can just show up at the UPS store and find the guy behind the counter investing his earnings in companies all over the world, without asking anybody's permission, and become really well versed in it, I think you've got something really exciting going on, something that can ultimately destroy many sources of oppression and despotism in our world today.
I love the idea of not asking for permission, right? That's so much of the essence of it all. Hey, Jeff, I would pick your mind all day. I can't. Where can we, besides Amazon, they can go to Amazon, they can buy Jeff Tucker books, Upside and Down.
Yeah, I've got so many books. I've got a new book coming out, by the way. I hope to finish it. There's an economist, a very brilliant economist named Deirdre McCloskey, who's writing the introduction to my next book. It should be out September 1st. It's called Wing Collectivism, The Other Threat to Liberty.
Please get me a copy. We'll have to do another call.
Oh, I'd like to. And then I've got, I guess 7 other books.
What's the best website for you? Is the best that people can go check your writing out?
Yeah, that's fee.org. I write every single day.
But you know how this writing stuff goes. I'm at 5 books, but I don't write. When I read your writing, I know how much time you've put in. I mean, I can write a book, okay, but I can read some other people's writing and I realize how much more time they put in. And I really appreciate the craft of your writing. I mean, when you read something like I did at the beginning of this podcast, that just makes me excited. Maybe it doesn't make other people excited. Maybe they're boring or whatever. But those 3 paragraphs I read at the beginning of this call, those things should be tattooed on the walls of our chests or our house or whatever. That's life.
Thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. I do work very hard at it, but I have to say I'm never satisfied. People ask me, what's my favorite thing I've written? And I always tell them it's the thing I'm going to write tomorrow.
Only as good as what the last word put down on the piece of paper.
That's right.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff, I appreciate your time today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.